Okay, we are at the end of the it's not really an objective like cluster thematically, but this is let me look here. Hold on just a second here. This is the end of the series. Oh, what happened? This is the end of the series. What? Oh, it's not working. Hold on. What happened? Where'd all my notes go? Oh, there we go. Yeah, this is at the end of the series of psukim that I commonly used to teach in high school. So, like all the other ones, I hope we get a new insight tonight. And this is a little tricky because this one is phrased in a very like straightforward way. Okay. I don't know how many of you are listening to my shiurim on chapter 25, which I'm doing in yeshiva in the mornings. But those are stated in a very like advicey way as opposed to a proverbsy way. So this one's a very advicey one. So and the trap with those is that it is very easy to look at it and be like, oh, that's obvious. Okay. So we'll see what happens here. For those who are new, we're gonna start by translating this in a on our own, and then we're gonna look at the minimalist commentators and translators. Then we're gonna raise all the questions and problems, and then we'll try to interpret it. Okay, so 1714. Poter maim reshis madon v'lifnei hisgala hariv natosh. V'lifnei hisgala hariv natosh. Okay, anyone want to try translating that? I know Tamar told me Isaiah's driving. I don't know if that means that he can. Isaiah's usually our go-to translator. No pressure, Isaiah.
I cannot see the word, so I will not translate.
Okay, fair enough. I do not want you. Mishlei would say that you should keep your eyes on the road. Okay, so I'll go ahead and translate this here. Okay, so poter is, I think a lot of people would see this word and associate to patur, like the rabbinic usage of Hebrew, which is exempt. I don't think there's a connection here. Okay, so you can see here in our BDB dictionary, patar is to separate, remove, or set free. Okay, mayim is water. Reshis has two meanings, and both of them are used in Mishlei. It either means the beginning, like Bereshis, or Reshis, like the best, or the chief, or the principal. So Poter Maim Reshis Madon. Okay, and Madon, oh, I didn't do Madon here. Madon, I would translate as strife. Let's see what the dictionary says. Madon is, yeah, strife or contention. Set free is similar to exempt. That's true. Racheli says in the chat. Okay, so yeah, all I meant, Racheli, is not that they're not connected. I said they're not connected. I meant I don't think exempt. I don't think putter is used for exempt in biblical Hebrew. So for whatever that's worth, but clearly there's a relationship as you point out. Okay, so the first half I would translate as a release of water is the beginning of strife. Okay, and again in Hebrew you can like reverse those. You could say the beginning of strife is like a release of water. In fact, I think that's probably better. I'm gonna, even though I like to stick to the order here, let's do that. The beginning of strife is, and I'm gonna insert the word like, a release of water. Okay, v'lifnei hisgala. Now hisgala is a weird word. Okay, and I believe, yeah, my dad has a question.
Oh, no, no, go on. I
Oh,
thought,
okay. So hold on just 1 second here. So hisgala, I believe, is only used, yeah, it's used rarely in Mishlei, only 3 times, and nowhere else in Tanakh. So it's very hard to infer what it means here. I think most people learn it to be a variant on Gimel Lamed Hey, which is to reveal or uncover or expose. And as you can see here in the BDB dictionary, it says to expose or lay bare. Okay, so lifnei hiskala hariv, before the conflict or the quarrel is revealed, natosh, which means to leave or forsake. Okay, abandon it. Okay, that's how I would say it. Okay, now let's look at our minimalist commentators and translators. All right, Mitsudos says poter is inyan peticha. So he says it means to open, is like an opening of water, kamo peter rechem, like the opening of a womb, which is in this week's parsha. Um, that's interesting. A release or opening of water. Okay. I don't know if those mean the same thing, but it's interesting. He just says peticha is opening. Hiskalea or hiskala is kamo hiskala with a hey. V'chol tushia yiskala. Or yiskalea, so it means to expose or uncover. And then natosh is azov. Okay. Malbim says Reeve is kolol hamariva mikol min shiyeh. So Reeve is the generic, the Reeve and Modern are the generic terms for fighting and quarreling. V'im yesh bo dalid nikra madon. The term shiavo lidei din karo riv dahainu lifnei his gala. Okay, fine. I think he's giving an interpretation here, so we're going to ignore that. Okay, moving right along here. Again, this is just us getting the translations. Sadigon says Keptiras Hamayim Reshi Samadon Lefikach Lifneshi Tis Rachav Natosh as Hamriva. So the way he translates it in his Arabic translation is like the release of the water, is the beginning of the strife. Lefikach, and therefore Lifneshi Tis Rachav, before it becomes widened, Natosh as Hamriva, abandon the quarrel. So what he's doing, we translate as before the quarrel is revealed or exposed. Sounds like he's saying before the quarrel itself becomes widened, then you should abandon it. Okay, subtle difference there. Okay, now the Targum, I don't really know what to do with this. So this is the Aramaic translation, and I've mentioned in the past that the Aramaic translations sometimes are going off of a different tradition in the Hebrew that was not preserved in our Tanakh. So I because I'm not confident in my Aramaic Targum grammar, I had ChatGPT translate the words, but the word that I do know is dama, which means blood. So the translation here seems to be he shed blood like flowing water in torrents. Okay, which is how I would translate. Ashe dama hech maya. Bloodshed is like water, megare tigre, that flows. Ukadam itztadia at edina. And before this says itztadia is a legal proceeding. Before the court proceeding, he distorted justice. No idea what's going on there. I'm going to ignore it unless someone has anything to contribute to that. But for our purposes, I'm going to ignore it. And then let's go with our English translations, and then we'll start analyzing here. So Art Scroll says, the beginning of a quarrel is like releasing water. Before the argument is revealed, abandon it. That's like ours, probably where I got it from. Rav says, a breakthrough of water is the beginning of a quarrel. Then before it becomes exposed, leave off contention. Pretty much the same thing. Corin says the beginning of strife is like letting out water. Okay, the same as releasing water, I think. Therefore, leave off contention before it breaks out. So it's also going here with his skala is like breaking out as opposed to becoming exposed. Let's see, is revealed or breaks out, let's say. Okay. And then our YouTube friend Peskin says the beginning of an argument is like breaching waters. So before it gets out of hand, drop the quarrel. I'm going to post all these in the chat. Racheli says bursts. Yeah, burst is good. For which one, Racheli? Are you talking about for poter or for reveal? For breaking out. Yeah, so I think it breaking out works better for poter, for like breaking out of water, because that's like peter rechem, like the breaking of of a womb. But hiskala, I'm not sure about. Okay, so we're gonna work with these translations here. Again, feel free to play fast and loose with these. The key ambiguities here, I'm going to use the transliterations here for the ambiguities. So the beginning of strife is like a poter, which is release or opening of water. And then before the conflict is hisgala. Hisgala, revealed or breaks out, abandon it. Those are the two ambiguities. Okay, questions. I think my dad is first.
So what is meant by the release of water?
Yeah, okay, that's going to obviously be a key question here. What is meant by poter mayim, a release of water? And just to clarify here, we're asking what is the mashal, okay, meaning what is the analogy, okay, like factually, right? Like, is this, are we picturing a faucet, a fire hydrant, which obviously I know they didn't have fire hydrants back then, but like a dam bursting, I don't know what other things have water burst, a downpour. I don't really know, like a torrent in a river, or in a flowing body of water. Yeah, so in other words, like I don't even know how specific this is supposed to be, but we have to understand what the metaphor is before we can decode it. Okay, Isaiah or Tamar.
Okay, yeah. This isn't like a real question. I'm just getting an observation is that I'm getting the vibes of like Yaakov and the well.
Interesting. I
And
thought
then
you were going a different direction there.
my drashy question is that like in that story, it seems like he's solving the fights by opening the water, and so why is it the opposite from there?
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you prefaced that by saying it's not a real question because I agree. But it is an observation. I was going to go with another observation. I thought you were going to go a different place with Yaakov. Anyone have another association that involves Yaakov? No? I was thinking, yes, I was thinking of that also. Is his statement to Ruvain? Where is that? That's gonna be 50 and 49. He says, Ruvain b'chori ata kol kivrei shizoni yeser v'yeser az pachas k'mayim al tosar kelis mishkavei avicha. Pachas k'mayim, Neiman Novesky translates this as rash like water. May you not be preeminent. I don't know if it's just like again, the imagery of like rushing water being bad. But yeah, so those are our subjective associations. So if you can connect it, great. But we'll leave off your association and my association, and stick to the text. Yeah, Kelly.
At what point is a conflict revealed?
Okay, good. What's the timeline? Okay. At what point is this quarrel or conflict? I'm gonna actually use the translation here. Riv. At what point is the Riv revealed? At what point is the Riv revealed? And what was the other thing you said after that?
I don't think I said anything else.
Oh, okay. All right, fine. Yeah. I guess and I'm gonna just add on to this. What is the point of no return for abandoning it? Abandoning it, right? Because it implies a point of no return, which I guess we could convert that to a question, right? What happens if you miss the point of no return? In other words, like, can nothing be done, or is it just less effective? Yes. Next is my dad.
Yeah. What are there appears to be no conflict or breaking of Torah laws or sinning there. There's just contention.
Right. So the question is your question, what's so bad about the conflict?
Okay, yeah, I guess that would be it.
Yeah. What's so bad about the about Riv? Is this actually, before we ask that, let's ask what type of Riv is this talking about? And broadly speaking, I think there's two types, just in terms of the way the word is used. I guess, like, is this, any generic interpersonal spat? Is this a court case? Because the Torah does use the word Riv for that. Is this I guess, can this include I guess I'm going to put in quotation marks, an objective conflict over something real and important, or is it confined to subjective phenomena? Oh yeah, that's what Racheli says in the chat. Is this a physical conflict? Conflict. What's the fun word? There's a bunch of fun words for like old-fashioned, like 1920s brawls. Fisticuffs. Like fisticuffs or a Donnybrook. I don't know why I like these terms. Or a military conflict. Yeah. What are you gonna say? I heard someone say something.
Is it unusual in Mishlei that they don't identify? Usually, we have an evil person and a righteous person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good question. Okay, so who are the actually I'm gonna put that as a one of our general questions and then make it more specific here. So what is the decision-making scenario here? Like what's going on? And then who are the players involved, right? The pasuk doesn't identify any Mishleic archetypes. Okay, so does that mean this can apply to anyone? Okay, and we'll mention this just to be responsible Mishlei learners. Can this apply to the context of the the local context? So, for example, our last week's pasuk was, "Whoever rewards evil for good, evil shall not depart from his house." And then the one before that was let a bear be robbed of her cubs. No, that's not how we translated it. Better to encounter a bear deprived of her cubs than a fool in his foolishness. And then before that, a rebellious man seeks only evil. Therefore, a cruel messenger will be sent against him. So, like, we have a bunch of candidates here for bad guys, right? So, like, or is this connected to the bad guys in the previous pasukim? Okay, Isaiah?
Yeah. So in the second half,
Mhm.
second half is saying like you should flee before things get revealed.
Yeah.
But it sounds like in the first half, the revelation is like intense and fast and immediate. So how would you know to flee in advance of that?
Okay. Okay, that's a good question also. So I'm going to actually broaden that as well, which is what is the relationship between the first half and the second half, especially in terms of practical implementation? In other words, it seems like the phenomenon in the first half is happening really quickly, whereas the second half is telling you advice as though you can see this coming. So I guess like this is kind of related to the timeline question, but just trying to think if this is the timeline question. Ask your question again. And by
Yeah,
timeline,
how are you?
yeah, go ahead.
My question is, how are you supposed to flee in advance of something if it happens like very quick with a fast
Okay.
impact?
How are you supposed to preempt the effect in the first half when it happens so fast? Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's worth asking this question. I think plain pshat here is it's telling you that because this is so fast and unstoppable in some way, you know, whatever the release of water is, then you should abandon it at the first sign that we're even in this situation, which is why, in my mind, this is connected to the timeline question. But still worth asking. You know, Philly?
Maybe like, is there a specific reason for this mushal that would tell you also how to abandon the
Okay.
conflict?
All right, that's a good question also. Okay, so I'm going to put this in a separate question after the mushal question, um, which is is this mushal only describing the problem? Because it clearly is describing the problem. Or does it also provide insight into the preemptive solution? Yeah. Okay, that's a really sharp question. Yeah, Isaiah?
Hi, it's Tamar.
Hmm.
So, this is about this scenario, I guess, which is kind of like has a fight already started. It's kind of what it sounds like, and like what's the relationship between this and like avoiding a Vadon?
Okay. Yeah. So let's to what extent, I'm going to just tack this onto the scenario question. To what extent has this fight already started? Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, Puttermime Rishis Madon Lifni, he's Galaha Riv Netosh. Okay, yeah. All right, what are the other questions here? There's still a couple more. So one question I have is, practically speaking, what does abandon it entail, right? Is this, I guess, like, what is this pasuk telling us to do, and is it telling us how? Yeah, okay.
Is there a difference between Reeve and Madon?
Good. That's another question. Yeah, that will put under our quarrel question. So, what type of madon is this talking about? And then, actually, I'm gonna do this. Hold on. What type of madon and reeve is this talking about? and then I'll make your question into a new question. That way we get the definitions here. Are the Madon and Reeve synonyms? If not, what is their relationship? Yeah, in other words, as an example, it seems like they're synonyms because it's one pasuk and it's telling us, this fight is like an opening of water. Therefore, before the fight becomes exposed, abandon it. Like if it was talking about two different things, then how is this even unified advice? But on the other hand, they are different words, they are different roots. Maybe it's talking about two stages of something. So that's a fair question. And then did we ask what reveal means? I can't remember. Iskala. I don't think we did. We did?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right, thanks. So what does Hisgala mean? What does it mean for the Reeve to become exposed or revealed or laid bare? And I guess we said, yeah, and we'll ask you also, and why is that bad? And I mean, the assumption is it's bad, I think. Yeah, okay.
Especially just that made me think like sometimes it's better to get things out in the open or to like
Right. That's a good question also. Right. Yeah, okay, that's good. To the contrary, maybe getting things out into the open is good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I feel like we have all the major questions. So let me start importing them into the chat, and you can tell me if you have another one. Oh, yet again, we didn't make it because Zoom still has the character limits. Okay, so there's that 1 through 6, and then let's do 7. Oh yeah, we're not going to make it here. 7 through 7 and 8 and 9, and then 10 and 10 and 11. Oh, you know what I did? Hold on. I put an announcement up here to remind myself to read it, and I didn't read it. The announcement is there's a 75% chance that there will be no shiur next week. I may not know at the last minute. This is going to be one of my Nija weeks, and I'm going to actually be able to attend one of my to attend the basketball game of my male students. So it might depend on how well they're doing. I might just have a last minute call about like whether maybe they don't want me to see their defeat if they're getting defeated. So I'll so stay tuned in the chat for whether I have shiur then. Okay. All right. So now, as we often do, let's take our minute to think, and then we'll interpret the pasukim here. I'm going to post this in the chat in case anyone joined after the fact. I didn't see who joined when. So take a minute to think, and then we'll hear what people have to say. And just methodology wise, by the way, okay, I feel like I haven't said this in a while, and I know I repeat myself a lot here, but when you're confronted with an obvious sounding pasuk in Mishlei, there are two routes to take. One route is to lean into the obviousness and try to express the obvious idea, but do it clearly. And many times what will happen is that will expose new directions of thinking or nuances that need to be sharpened. And then from the obvious, you could get to the non-obvious. The other way to take it is to deliberately try to look at it from a non-obvious angle, like take the most difficult translations and then try to get an idea out of that, or take the most difficult questions and tackle those head on, and then you'll get to a non-obvious idea. So those are the two routes you can take. I mean, you can take more than that, but those are the two routes that I find fruitful. And if you need one place to start, I definitely think you should start with a water analogy because the whole thing revolves around that. Okay, let's start with Isaiah. Or tomorrow.
Okay, yeah. So I guess what I'm thinking is like maybe the second half is telling you like that at some point there's like a certain like there's a strife between you and another person, like a potential point of contention, or like something that you have a disagreement about. Like
Yeah.
you perceive like the potential for things to go bad in a way that has practical consequences.
Okay.
So I guess the definition of like what's the word in that half of the pasuk?
Iskala.
No, not that word. The best. No, not that word. The
I'll
other
read the
word.
pasuk again. Poter mayim reshis madon.
The definition of riv.
Allah hariv nitosh. Yeah, riv.
Reeve
Yeah.
would be like the actual thing that you disagree, like the disagreement.
Okay. The
So
underlying thing you're saying.
yeah, the underlying thing. So that's
Yeah.
going to be revealed through like altercation, through like things that like when the things start happening, like I don't know if it be physical violence or some other thing. I'm kind of like saying that's the model, and that's like once that starts happening, things happen fast, and they're like negative consequences very fast.
Yeah.
So you perceive that there's a situation that could lead to something like that happening. You should back away from the situation in advance before
Okay.
it comes to that point.
Okay, so you're this is a good start, but you're also revealing a question that we did not ask. Okay, and I think if we answer that question, it'll help develop the idea more. So a question here is, what is the hava amina? I.e., what mistaken view would we have without this pasuk? Okay, so let me write what you said first, and then I would like to answer that question. Okay, so the scenario here is where there is an underlying reeve, okay, point of contention between two people that has not yet erupted into open conflict. And what this is saying is, if because things can move fast once that nerve is struck, whatever, you should abandon it as soon as you see any sign of it heading in that direction. Okay, so my two questions are like this. One question for clarification here is, what does the water analogy add? Okay, and you might have already answered that, but I just wanted to state explicitly. And then the second question is, what is the hava amina, which is what we just asked.
Yeah, I think you can answer those questions, have the same answer.
Okay, good.
It's like the hava amina is that once like you're fine now, nothing's happening, so you can just fix it like once something starts like actually going wrong. But the thing is telling you like, no, you actually like can't fix the situation. It's like a flood. Like you can't hold it back once things are like once a real altercation starts, and like you won't be able to stop it. So you have to stop in advance.
Okay, once the altercation starts, you can't stop it. So you need to stop it in advance. Okay, so let me now just ask one more question, which is why not? Now you could just say experience tells us that you can't, but I think if we ask why not, that'll help us get this even clearer.
I mean, I don't know if this is the only why, but like
yeah,
at that point, at the point of like I don't know, I'm just thinking about physical, but like a fight, but it could be something else. Like people's emotions are too high at that point to go back. So that's one reason.
By the way, I think there are multiple answers to this question. Okay, so one is that when people are thinking with their minds, okay, there's at least a potential for both people seeing eye to eye. But once their emotions get involved, then there's no guarantee that the two parties, okay, even you, can think clearly. Okay, that's one. Anyone have any other answers to this question?
I have something also.
Sure.
Which is that I think that it becomes like a feedback loop where everybody has more to lose, actually.
Okay.
Once the fight is already started.
Okay, that's also good. Becomes a negative feedback loop where each blow that's dealt increases the conflict, or I guess like it adds to the conflict. All right, that's good. Whereas before the first blow is dealt, or I'd say, or even before, even after it's dealt, but before you reciprocate, then you can prevent that feedback loop from starting. That's really good. Okay. Anyone else have any answers to this question about why you can't stop it, or why it's like floodwaters? I have another one, which is
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's not the only thing like this, but the fact that it's a two parties just adds a layer of complexity.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that is true. I'm just trying to think about that for 1 second here. Because there are two parties involved, then by definition, you don't have all the facts or all the control over the situation. Whereas it's easy to believe you'll have control. In other words, I think that's another big mistake here, is that people think that they're going to have control over the situation, but they forget that there's another party involved, and that there are factors and decisions that operate independently of their own will. Another one that I was thinking here, and I kind of am getting this from the bear pasuk, or the fool in the bear pasuk, really, is that you never know, like, how how far afield or how severe the other person will make things, and like, not to not to make this political, but and I honestly don't mean this politically, but like, sometimes you look at the headlines and you're like, huh, I didn't predict it going in that direction. And so maybe other people did. Again, I'm not following the story here, but like with the whole Trump Greenland thing has been going on for a long time. But like, and I didn't even read the article. When I look at the news today, I'm seeing a bunch of stuff about how he's like making this about the Nobel Peace Prize snub, Like, I wouldn't have thought that it was going to get involved in that, And I bet the people who were on the Peace Prize planning party did not think that this would somehow result in potentially like international conflicts, And like, that's what that's what we said when in the bear pause, because like, you never know how, human beings are not like bears, where you can where there's like a discrete set of predictable behaviors. People can go all sorts of crazy and make all sorts of decisions in a range of retaliation. So yeah. Okay. Is this a complete idea? Sorry, Isaiah, did you have your hand up for another reason? I didn't see if it went down and up, or if that's from before.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So is this a complete idea here? So I'm just going to try to restate it in my own words here. So in other words, the scenario that we're talking about here is that that there's going to be a point of contention, and and right now it's been under the surface, and you tell yourself, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. If it blows up, we'll deal with that problem then. But the problem is that it's very easy to wait too long and to ignore the warning signs and then have it blow up. And so just, how would you answer your own question, Isaiah, about given how swiftly things progress, how are you supposed to interpret or how are you supposed to implement the advice in the second half? I think there is an answer, but I'm curious how you would answer that question.
Well, my idea was thinking on, like, you can tell something is coming, and so you back away
Okay.
before it first
Right.
half happens.
Yeah. Okay. So that is true. That is part of the way that you're explaining the scenario. I was going to say that, like, that, I mean, this is maybe the same thing that you're saying here, but like, anything that could be a warning signal, you should treat as a red alert, and err on the side of preemptive avoidance, So in other words, that's why it's like, like if uh okay, I was just talking about this recently about the right now I'm still in Seattle, and I always think about like the um the two major disasters that could just destroy this entire part of the United States is the Cascadia quake and then Yellowstone erupting, and and scientists don't know when that could happen. And like if someone said, well, get out before it happens, as soon as you see warning signs, like, you know, to a certain extent, when it starts happening, it's going to be unavoidable. But like, I don't know, like if I hear reports of a bunch of earthquakes, around a certain, around Yellowstone or whatever, like I'm gonna go ahead and like start looking at flights. But like, there's only so much you can do. In other words, the point I'm making with the analogy here is like treat everything as like a maximum red alert warning signal for the purposes of abandoning it, of like avoiding it. Um, yeah, I agree. Okay. I just want to debate whether I want to share an announce or not announcement, an example. Give me 1 second. No, I'm not going to share it. But if you meet me in person shortly after this and you want to hear the example, I'll tell you the example. Okay. Racheli, you're up.
Okay, so okay. So I was gonna say that basically the beginning of strife, like the description of a release of water, is describing how people get into like a point of conflict in the first place. It's a little bit far-fetched, but basically like I mean, I don't know, the way that water like flows kind of without concern for what's in its way, like a river.
Hmm.
So people when they forget to view the other person as a person and kind of just see it as like an opponent to like knock down or
Ah,
whatever, that starts conflict. And basically, the further down this road that you go, the worse it gets until it can erupt or whatever. And so to answer the question of whether the mushal instructs you how to abandon it, I think the answer would be that you have to kind of act the opposite of how a river acts and like slow down and gain consideration for the other person and um, like actually consider what direction you're going in.
okay, that's really good. I like that. Okay, so in other words, just to state in my own words here, or say make sure I understand here. So it's saying that the beginning of a quarrel, the quarrels, conflicts, I should say, conflicts begin when you are acting like water. So this is not like the Bruce Lee thing I'm always quoting of "Be like water, my friend." This is the back kind of "Be like water," where
Yeah.
you are, yeah, where you are um heedless of the fact that there's another person, and you're just kind of like, you know, trying to get from point A to point B in terms of your own fluid dynamics, like however your own, the own dynamics of your own motion, however that is. So that's when the quarrel is going to start. And so the solution is built into that muscle also, which is don't be like water, my friend. And get out of that mode of thinking before, or not mode of thinking, get out of that mode of like interpersonal interaction before the consequences happen. Now, just tell me, I think that's a really good interpretation of the first half. How are you saying, just how are you reading the solution into the second half, or are you not reading the solution to the second half? And if so, then what is the second half saying?
Well, I think the second half is instructing you to abandon the conflict before it gets to the point where it's like past no return, whatever. But the mushel of water is how you abandon it because it's saying like
Okay.
this is how it starts, so it ends by not
Ah,
doing
okay, okay. Right. So in other words, so the second half is telling you to abandon this. So in other words, it is telling you, in other words, according to Isaiah, your the timeline of the abandon advice is before the conflict emerges at all. According to you, it's like once you notice that you have already started being like water, then it's telling you to abandon it. Is that correct?
Yeah. Or
Okay,
like,
good.
yeah.
No, what are you gonna say?
No, I was just thinking also about like how pride gets in the way and like the more someone like digs down, like the more they get stuck. I don't know if that's directly related, but it was just like a similar, like once you realize that your ego is involved at that exact point, like don't let it go further because it just
Okay.
gets worse.
Okay, so the conflict has already started, and that's when you should abandon it by ceasing to be like water. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned ego because that's actually where I went in my interpretation. Which we'll get to in a little while. Anyone else have any other interpretations here? Is this a record? We've only had two ideas. I thought this was gonna be like one of the problems where we just have too many ideas. Well, it could mean that we could go more into the meforshim here. Okay. I mean, some of our people who always have ideas are not here tonight, so I'll chalk it up to that. Okay, so I'm gonna go down. I think this is the last item from the archives. Again, these are the archives from the first round of teaching this in high school, from a long time ago. So I haven't reread this yet, but my archive, I called it "Loosening the Ego Valve." Let's see if this stands up still. The mashal in this pasuk aims to refute a particular illusion, namely the illusion that arguments build and build until the participants reach the point where they lose control. In truth, arguments are doomed to reach that point from the outset, since they are fueled by wounded egos battling for dominance. The nature of such competitions is such that the combatants will keep at it and constantly escalate until one of them is defeated. Thus, one should view the beginning of an argument as releasing an unstoppable torrent of water and should abandon the argument before its true egotistical nature is exposed. Yeah, so that's what I was saying, is that yeah, I think this works out unless people have problems with it, which is that I want to elaborate on the first part, is I do think that even after the fact, I feel like there are people who view quarrels as gradually building, and that is what the pasuk is trying to refute with the analogy that a release of water is not gradual; it is instantaneous. And I think the analogy that I like the best here is like a dam bursting, that all the pressure is already there. And it's just a matter of when you release it, then the whole thing goes forth. So if you sense yourself, and this is similar to what Isaiah was saying, but like if you sense the ego dynamics there, okay, and it could be because the other person is an egotistical fool. It could be because you're an egotistical fool. It could be that neither of you are fools, but your egos just get awakened. So then you should treat it as though, don't tell yourself, I just have to prevent this before it builds up too much. Treat it as though anything could set off one of the egos. And once you start off the ego, then you're into the dynamics that we spelled out in Isaiah's idea of, of people retaliating and of other people doing crazy things and all that other stuff. So it's the ego under the surface, and that's why it's using the language of revealed or exposed, because it's already there. The ego battle is already there. It's just that if they're let loose, then it's going to be like a rush of water. So that was my idea. Anyone have any? I feel like we should, if we can come up with good real world examples of this, then that would really be good. I'm just trying to think of one that is my dad.
So you're saying when the egos get out of control, there's no reversing the situation. There's no peace that's attainable at that point.
Right. At least don't count on it. I mean,
The things I'm thinking about is, the way they're training police officers and people like that these days is to defuse a situation, de-escalate.
Right.
And that's what's missing here. I mean, it should be, if the de-escalation fails. I mean, there's still a possibility of sidetracking the argument so it doesn't get out of control. But
Right.
you've got to be aware that can work. That you can.
Yeah. So I mean, it is. I think the de-escalation would be included in abandon, meaning that it is telling you that there are ways to in other words, I'm not saying that it's inevitable that this is going to collapse into a full-on explosion. I'm saying that if you stoke it or if you keep it going, then it'll be inevitable. But the whole thing is not inevitable. Otherwise, the pasuk wouldn't tell you to abandon it. So de-escalation, I would file under abandonment. Yeah, Isaiah.
This is kind of like the wrong, maybe the wrong order to ask this question now. But do we address like why it's abandoning it instead of, let's say, like, I don't know, does this include like resolving the conflict through discussion
Yeah,
or
it's a
something
good
like
question.
that? Like, are you trying to?
Yeah, let's add that first of all here, which is also why use the word abandon. Yeah, so the way I would this might be, again, I'm trying to reconstruct this from when I learned it so many years ago. I think the way it fits into my interpretation is instead of treating the conflict as something that will happen in the future, treat it as though the conflict is there now and abandon the conflict. So I don't think it's telling you how to do it, but the verb abandon is part of the way of framing it. In other words, rush of water, expose, and abandon all treat it as though the conflict is live and extant right now. And that's why, according to me, it's using that word. Yeah, Racheli?
Also, I feel like to abandon something means to let go of something that you're holding on to.
Oh,
So
that's good also.
like the conflict is important to you and you just need to let it go. Or
Right. That's also true. Abandon is a good, yeah, you have to drop, you have to be willing to walk away from your own desire for ego dominance. And abandon is definitely a good word for that. Yeah. And letting it go is a good idiomatic parallel to abandon. I like that. That's a good point. Yeah, Isaiah or Tamar?
Yeah, I was going to say also, I feel like maybe with your interpretation, um, it's the fact I think that it's specifically like an ego invested conflict. I think it's possible to have conflicts that come from a genuine difference of opinion, but the thing that you have to let go of is the ego. And then you can work it out maybe, but you still have to abandon it.
Right, that's true. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think what can happen as well is even if your ego is not involved, there is a thing where the other person is so accustomed to getting involved in ego battles that they'll project an ego dominance battle onto you. Like again, I know I've used this analogy a lot, but like this is the classic thing of like, in the movies, I only say in the movies because I don't really hang out in bars, you accidentally like bump against like the big burly guy and he says, "Oh, you want to pick a fight?" Well, you just bumped into him. You have no ego invested in this, but he immediately sets it up as an ego battle, and a battle for dominance. And so you have to be willing to let go of any stake you have that might be stoking a perceived ego battle, whether it is legit or totally accidental or real. Yeah, Racheli?
that was like the exact example I thought of. I don't know which one it fits exactly, but I feel like in the movies it's always like one guy like punches one person and then suddenly the whole room is like
Yeah.
exploding and it's just like, yeah.
Yep. And that was kind of what I was thinking of also with the when Tamar said for answering Isaiah, hold on, where to go? That the negative feedback loop, but then also that there's two parties involved. I wanted to actually add to that Kal v'chomer, since it's likely that even more unpredictable parties will get involved. In other words, like if this person recruits a friend to defend them or whatever, then who knows how far it's gonna go. Okay, so let's now go to our meforshim, and I have not reviewed this yet. I did not have time this afternoon. So let's just see where this takes us here. Okay, so Mesilas David says, Podramayim, Tchilas HaMeriva Hi Kipoteach Hur Begeder Amas Hamayim. This is also different than what we've seen. Okay, so the beginning of a conflict or a quarrel is like opening. Sorry, not opening. I started to say poking because I'm thinking poking a hole. Opening a hole, not a hole, a hole in Begeder Amas Hamayim, in the there's probably a better translation than this, in the I'll say in the side of an irrigation, not ditch, an irrigation pipe. I'm just gonna say pipe, even though I don't know if they have pipes. But Maim Yotzim Derech Bo, and the water flows out through it. V'hachur holech u'misrachev. Oh, this is like a dam. Okay, this is like what I'm imagining. And the hole continues to get wider and wider. Well, sorry, wider and wider. Kichein der hamadon sheholech v'gadel. So too the quarrel grows and grows. Lifnei, and before, ad lo nizgala hamadon livnei adam That's also interesting. Before the quarrel becomes revealed to others, natosh esariv, abandon the quarrel, ki achar shetizgale, because after it becomes revealed, yimtsu macharcharim v'lobim tishaket. There will be, I don't know how to translate macharcharim, but I translate as rabble rousers. I don't really think it's rabble rousers. But that's if anyone has a better translation, let me know. Rousers. And it will not quickly cease. Okay, so let me summarize this and we'll get the main idea. Summary is a quarrel is like a small hole poked into a large I'm trying to, is there a pipe? I was a pipe, okay, into a large pipe, okay. At first, the water will trickle out, but there's potential for it for the hole to grow bigger and bigger until the water rushes out. Okay. So too with a quarrel. Stop it while it's a trickle before it becomes public and other people get involved, since then it will be more difficult to stop. Now, the question is this just another way of saying ideas that we've already said tonight, or is there a new idea here? And then the hint, and I'm saying hint as if I already know, but I don't really know that this is the answer, but the I guess the clues are, we didn't specifically think of a hole widening in a pipe, nor did we focus in a primary way on the quarrel being publicized to others. So to me, if there's a new idea, it's going to come from there. So let's see if we can work out a new idea here. And it'd be nice if the two went together, if like the widening, because right now I feel like each of those two new elements is could stand on its own. In other words, you can make this pasuk entirely about publicizing a quarrel versus keeping it private, and you can make a whole idea about the metaphor of a small hole widening. So if we can get them together, that'd be even better. I'll just say one thing about the publicizing that we didn't mention yet. What we mentioned was that other people can get involved and what do you call it? And then that leads to more unpredictability. But another thing is it can also make it harder for the original combatants to back down. In other words, if I'm arguing with you in private and you start sensing that you're wrong, because obviously it's going to be you, not me. If you're going to start sensing that you're wrong, then you might be able to be willing to like admit defeat privately. But once your reputation is at stake, or once all eyes are on you, then it might be more difficult to do that. So I'm just going to write this down as a possibility here. Is one factor that's new is that in private, it's easier for the quarreling parties to admit they were wrong. But once the quarrel is public, they'll want to save face or protect their reputation. I guess it's the same thing. They want to protect their reputation. And they might double down and dig in for the long game. So that's one factor. I mean, I think the hole in the pipe growing does refer to what we were saying before, which is that the more people the more people get involved, and the more complicated it gets. So the more people get involved, the more complicated it'll get. Perhaps the widening of the hole refers to what we said above, that the more people get involved, the more complicated it can get. I mean, think of all the cases that you've seen over the last, however many years it's been, 9-10 years now. Once once like, cancel culture became a thing, where so many of these, it's tricky because a lot of these things do need to be made public. But imagine how many of them like went public before the person got a chance to apologize, and like you could have just like kept it, between the wronged party and the wrongdoer, and then that would have been it. But once it becomes headlines, then the whole thing spirals out of proportion. Okay, I'm gonna read this comment here from Noah. It reminds me of maybe I missed this earlier. Oh no, this is a recent comment. Reminds me of a more domestic / Shabbostic example of the bar riot scenes. Where I think about how someone tells a friend about a weird or uncomfortable comment from person A, not knowing that the friend has pre-existing beef with person A, and that friend turns it into a malicious thing. That's another point. So it goes from this was weird, help me interpret, to kill person A. Yeah, that's a great point also. Is that uh additionally, the more people's right, the more public the quarrel is, the easier it is for other people to heap their emotional baggage onto the original conflict, or make this into something bigger than it was. Yeah. Yeah. Then it becomes a multi-person battle. Yeah, that happens a ton. That's a good point. Yes, I don't know if there's a new unified idea other than I think the publicizing is the big thing here. And look, it reads really well into the pasuk. I mean, it says before it becomes public, abandon it. I think that's a very easy way to say it. So the idea here is, so the takeaway, I think, practical takeaway is view the private to public binary as a critical factor in how easy it will be to stop the conflict. Stop it before it becomes public, or else it will grow in all the ways we said. So that's a nice, clean, practical takeaway. Okay, unless anyone has anything else, we'll go into Rבינו Yona. Short Rבינו Yona here. Oh yes, Racheli.
Well, isn't it saying that it's kind of not a binary, that it kind of happens like fluidly from private to public?
Is that what he's saying? Hold on.
I don't know. Maybe I'm.
See, the way I was reading it is that the quarrel is already private. That's the small hole.
Yeah.
You should patch it up before it goes public, which means before it gets big to the point where like the dam like bursts, like because I didn't state this out, but like I think I'm not a I'm not a pipesman, I'm not a plumber, but like I do think that there is such a thing as when it's just a small leak, you could patch it up. But then there is a certain point where it grows, and then like the whole wall collapses. So I think that's the analogy here, is that when the quarrel is private, you can still stop it. But once it grows to a critical point, then it'll get public, and then it all
Right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. No, but I'm glad you asked that. That clarified it though. Okay. Rבינו Yona says, "Tchilas hamadon k'inyan haposeach avnei shever hamayim." Is this a legit Rבינו Yona? I don't have my critical edition of Mishlei here. Tchilas hamadon k'inyan haposeach avnei shever. This is my spidey sense is going off that there's a bad text here. Avnei shever hamayim. It's got to be Im yirtze listom v'lischor miyad kodem shiardu hamayim lifrots tasig yada l'sachram aval achrei shiarbu lishtof lifrots hagadarim misaviv lo yuchal. You know what I think it is? All right, what I want to say is okay. All right, I'll try translating it. Okay. The beginning of a quarrel is like one who opens. So he uses Avne Shever. I'm pretty sure this is a bad text. Hamayim, but someone can jump in if they think they know what he's saying. Im yirtza listom lischor miad kodem shiradu hamayim. Because if one wishes to seal it, and I think lischor, I'm not sure now. Look at the Klein dictionary. Um, why is it taking so long? I'm just trying to think if there's any other place I could get a good Rubén Yona. Why is it taking so long? I don't know. All right, anyway, let's go on. And blank, hold on a second. And blank immediately before the water falls, lifrots and breaks through, tasi gyado lasachram. You will succeed in blanking them. But once it increases and floods and breaks down fences all around, you won't be able to. Yeah, I think like fence it in is probably what it's basically saying. To fence it in. V'chein inyan hamadon ki b'tchilas yuchol limshol berucho lintoshoso alkin lifnei hiskala hariv netoshoso. Likewise, with a quarrel, ki b'tchilaso yuchol limshol berucho. At its start, one is able to control his. I think he's using the word ruach here as anger because that's how he used it in the bear pasuk. Or that's how I use it in recent pasuk. Lintosh oso, to abandon it. Alkain, therefore, lifnei hiskala hariv netosh oso, before the riv is exposed, abandon it. Okay, so even though we didn't translate all of the words here, I'm getting the impression that we're dealing with like stopping a flood. Like I don't know if this, again, I'm totally guessing here, but I wonder if this is like sandbags, that are trying to stop a flood, that as the water is like flowing, you can create a wall of sandbags and stop it. But once the flood is actually starting, you can't just throw sandbags into the thing and hope for it to stop. Now, again, we're kind of guessing here, so I don't know if how reliable this is. Anyone have any? I don't want to dwell on this because I'm not so sure if this is a good text. But anyone have any ideas that are triggered by this? I mean, what intrigues me about, yeah, go ahead. Okay.
I think it's similar to what I was saying because it's talking about like your behavior is like the water, but
Right.
I don't know much.
Yeah.
I
I
guess
think
the difference is, yeah, continue.
to me, the thing that intrigues me is I think this is also a different interpretation of the water than what we've seen. Because if I'm right about this floodwater thing, we're not talking about like a valve opening. We're not talking about a hole that's leaking and then it bursts forth. We're talking about like, you know, like I don't know if you've ever seen, footage of or seen in real life like a hurricane or a flood. There is a point where you can like put up preemptive measures to stop it in advance, and then there's a point of no return. In that sense, I agree with you, Racheli, also that this is talking about like a. Actually, no, I don't agree with you. I mean, what you're saying is a possibility, but not the way I was thinking. Okay, let's leave it. I never feel comfortable. I trust my spidey sense with these Rubeni Yonas, and I don't feel comfortable trying to interpret this without knowing what all the words are, knowing that they're correct, and one letter can make a difference. Okay, let's go to for the rest of these. I had ChatGPT, which I have not vetted yet. Let's look at who would be good to look at here. Sadia Gaon. I'm going to translate this on my own, and we'll check it against the ChatGPT. He intends in this Shahara v'hamidyanim in bi'acholtecha lahafsikam, that the harm and the conflicts, it's not in your ability to stop them, and not to fence them in or to limit them, lamida misuyamis, with any particular measure. V'tachen shetachshov l'riv be'eser milim. One might think to engage in a quarrel with 10 words. These patchu lemea milim, and it'll expand to 100 words. Anyone who's ever accidentally started a fight in the comment section on social media can relate to this. You say one little thing and then it blows up into a whole big thing. V'yihu kamayim she'ata poseach mimenu ma'at uposeach hu la'at mo harbe. It's like water that you open it a little bit, but then it opens up on its own a lot. Has its own force. Kamoshe hisrachava machlokes b'nei Ephraim im yiftach ad shenehergu arba'im ushnaim elef. To the point where the disagreement between the Ephraimites with Yiftach increased until 42,000 were killed. Okay, so I had to look into this because I don't know my shoftim that much, but this is an example without going into the details. This was an example of like a personal spat that turned into a like a civil war type scenario where like it led to one tribe retaliating and like led to thousands of deaths. Aval Gideon b'tivunaso hifsik es hariv ufias osam v'amar halo tov olos Ephraim mi batir Eliezer. So he Gideon stopped the quarrel and appeased them. Yeah. So is this new or is this see, I think this brings out a new dimension. I think this could fit into multiple ideas here, but like new insight is sometimes you have a way that you envision the quarrel will go based on your plan, but it takes on a life of its own. Okay, so in other words, like next time you envision yourself saying, I'll stop this whole thing with a clever 10-word retort, imagine that as a as opening a water valve and the force of the water taking over and making you unable to close it, and again, I think it's like a good, I wish I knew, I had more imagery of what their valves were like, because I feel like we don't really interact with valves like that. Like, if you turn on the sink, it's not going to be uncontrollable and unstoppable, and if you open a fire hydrant, it will be, but like, so like I don't know of any valve that we regularly interact with that would like lend itself to this muscle. But what I'm trying to suggest here is like, if you picture look, imagine you're walking by a pipe and you see like water streaming out of the pipe. You would never take a screwdriver and like jam it into the hole in the pipe, because that it could just explode and then you have uncontrollable water on your hands, and all your clothing. So like that's what it's saying here is, don't try to envision a scripted end to this conflict, because you can't script conflicts. It's like you can't script conflicts. Okay, there's a lot of bad improv. All right, yeah. Okay, let's do a couple more. I'm just skimming this here. I'm just going to read the Emmanuel Haromי. I've really liked him lately because he's very descriptive in his in how he talks out the ideas. Amar ki haschalas hariv ha'amaran hu me'od nakel bereshiso. So it's saying that the beginning of a quarrel and a fight is very easy or light at its outset. V'chamor b'achris, but severe at its end. V'hu dome be'inyano l'mi sheposeach nekev katan l'mayim rabim hamechunasim. It's like someone who opens a small hole in many gathered waters, so I guess like a cistern. Shanekavahu misracha v'holech. So he's going like to David. The hole will get wider and wider. Kshuposeach also hanekev hakatan. And when you widen that little hole, nira be'enav shlo asamuma, you see, it seems in your eyes, it seems like you didn't do much, right? Yeah, all I did was just poked it. V'sofol hisrachev achiatu b'sibas hanekavahu kol mine. But then that little opening is going to result in all the water going out. Okay, yeah. I kind of wish we had a relatable example of where this happens. I don't have one, so someone please chime in if you have a good relatable one. So sometimes the beginning of a quarrel can be over something extremely small. Yarbu hadvarim ad shetigadil hamariva v'haktata. And sometimes on account of that small thing, then the matters will grow, and the quarrel and the fighting will increase. V'lachein amar hachacham atzasi hi shlifnei sheyizgalea hamadon klomar kodem sheyarbe v'yigdal v'yizgale netosh hariv v'ti hey b'milas hariv hey hayidia. Oyi hariv shem hapoal mimbinin hifil. So in other words, he's saying you should stop it before it happens. So I think this is pretty much like the Metzudas David, but the thing that he adds is that I'm just going to say this main idea is similar to Metzudas David, but adding the point that major quarrels can start over trivial matters. So don't do anything to stoke those small conflicts, lest you find yourself with a huge fight. Yeah, Racheli?
I think practically it also reminds someone that like the small things matter because I think sometimes someone could say, okay, so that person's frustrated with me over this little thing, or I know that this bothers them, but it's small, but it reminds you that it can turn
Yeah.
into something big and it, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What it reminds me of is I don't remember what we said about this in our Thursday night women's Pirkei Avos shiur, but it reminds me of the Mishnah that's the Mishnah Torah. Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. I want to say it was in chapter 4. Yeah. Huhai Omer, who says this? Ben Azai says, Al ti baz l'chol adam v'al ti maflig l'chol davar. Do not be disrespectful to any person, and do not degrade any matter. She'en l'cha adam, she'en lo shav, ein l'cha davar, she'en lo makam. There's no person without his hour, and no thing without its place. I don't remember if we said there that that's talking about this, but I feel like that advice could fit in here of like, don't say, oh, it's so small, it's not important. No, small things could turn into big things, and to the whatever extent, obviously you can't be perfect, but to whatever extent you can, you should care about the small things, and small things can mean a lot to people that have a different value system or weigh that differently than the way you value it. Okay, I think this is a good stopping point for tonight. Let's review our ideas first. So we had Isaiah's idea, which is that when you sense an underlying dynamic of quarrel or competition or dominance, whatever you want to say it is, so then anything you see heading in the direction of bring that into the open, stop. And we listed a bunch of reasons why it could grow or why you can't stop it once it starts, which is that people's emotions get involved and it leads to a negative feedback loop, and you never know what's going on in the other person's head, and you can't control the other person, and if it's many people, even more so, and you don't know how far the other person is going to be willing to take things. Then we had Racheli's idea, which is really about the psychology of interpersonal relationships that lead to conflict, which is if you find yourself just single-mindedly going about your own goals, relating to other people as objects that are in your way, so then that is what's going to lead to conflicts, because you're not going to be regarding the other person. And I didn't say this then, but that could either be for intrinsic reasons, like people don't like being viewed as an obstacle or an object, but also it could lead you to make bad decisions where you don't take into account their feelings or their priorities or values, and then that leads to conflict. And so once you see yourself behaving that way, then you should know that the conflict has already started and you should abandon it. Then we had my idea, which is that this is addressing the fallacy that interpersonal arguments gradually build up and then explode. But in reality, the explosion comes from the egos that are at play from the beginning. So don't view it as though it's going to get built up and tell yourself, oh, I can stop it before it gets to that point. No. Treat it as though it's a live threat right now and stop it before the ego battle comes out in the open. Then we had the Metzudas David, who said that it has to do with private to public, that there is a critical point where when it's in private, it's like a small leak, but when it's in public, it's like the gushing of the water that can't be stopped. So too, stop this or prevent it from happening or apologize or whatever it is, or let it go when it's still in private. Because once it gets into public, other people will get involved, people will double down, they'll throw their own emotional baggage into the thing, and it could get even worse. Rבינו Yona, we didn't really get. And then Emmanuel Haromי, is that the last one we did? Yeah, Emmanuel Haromí. Yeah. Oh no, sorry. Saidigon said that, or we got from here that don't try to envision a script of how this fight is going to go down because it could look completely different than the way you envision it. And then Emmanuel Haromí added this idea of big fights can start off really small, and so you should be heedful of the small things because they could grow. Okay, very practical. We did get new insights, at least I did. And next week's one that we have. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say next week. Next time. Oh yeah, this is also one that I've done a lot. Okay, fine. So we'll have to get a finish for there also. So stay tuned. It might be a literal game time decision whether I give shiur because it might have to do with how the game goes. Okay. And I also don't know how far away the game is from the location where I'd be giving shiur. So I'll have to get back to you on that. But stay tuned in the chat for announcements. Okay, thanks for coming, and until next time.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.